Hi guys, this is Allison from Allylatkreations211. How are you? You know what I'm going to say. Please like, share, and subscribe to my channel if you haven't done so already. If you get anything from my work, a connect the dot, an epiphany, a mind-blown moment, new books to read, new authors to explore, please consider supporting my work. All the links are on the video. Thank you. And for the holidays, check out Allylatkreations211.com for examples of my work. I customize and make pyramids and artwork and a bunch of other goodies. And I got 2 new candles that I just whipped out. Really fun, wintry, winter magic. Smells like a man cave. And then I have Frozen Stream, something like that. I don't remember the names. I came up with some witty stuff. Those are going to be whipped out. I have a few more I'm going to make. And yeah, I do candles, ornaments, portraits, all kinds of stuff. Check it out. And of course, email me if you're interested in anything, because that's how everything is going through. So we have the Secret Doctrine by Blavatsky, and we're on the solar theory, and of course, synchronicities and divine timing. We got some solar flares and CMEs hitting the atmosphere, and we're supposed to see the stupid aurora borealis over where I am. And guess what? I didn't get to see it because the chemtrails are seeding the clouds to make it rain so that I can't see beautiful things. Very pissed off. Anywho, I figured this would be an interesting read and to see what she has to say about the solar theory. A short analysis of the compound and single elements of science as against the occult teachings. How far scientific is this theory as generally accepted? It should be very interesting. In his reply to Dr. Gull's attack on the theory of vitality, connected inseparably with elements of the ancients and the occult philosophy, Professor Beale, the great Here we go again with my dyslexia. Sorry, guys. You got letters moving. There's numbers moving too on the page. Physiologist, there we go, has a few words as suggestive as they are beautiful. Quote, there is a mystery in life, a mystery which has never been fathomed, and which appears greater than, more deeply than the phenomena of life are studied and contemplated. In living centers, far more central than the centers seen by the highest magnifying powers, in centers of living matter, where the eye cannot penetrate, but towards which the understanding may tend to proceed, changes of the nature of which the most advanced physicists and chemists fail to afford us the conception. Nor is there the slightest reason to think that the nature of these changes will ever be ascertained by physical investigation, and as much as they are certainly of an order or nature totally distinct from that which any other phenomenon known to us can be regulated, end quote. This mystery, or the origin of the life essence, occultism locates in the same center as the nucleus of prima materia, for they are one of our solar system. Quote, the sun is the heart of the solar world system, and its brain is hidden behind the visible sun. From thence, sensation is radiated into every nerve center of the great body. and the waves of life essence flow into each artery and vein. The planets are its limbs and pulses, end quote. It was the start elsewhere in the Theosophy that occult philosophy denies that the sun is a globe in combustion, but defines it simply as a world, a glowing sphere, the real sun being hidden behind, and the visible being only its reflection, its shell. The Nesmith willow leaves, mistaken by Sir J. Herschel for solar inhabitants, are the reservoirs of solar vital energy, the vital electricity that feeds the whole system. Pause. I urge people to look up the solar patent of the solar simulator and what could be our true sun, the galactic sun, not the one that is above us that we see each and every day, that is changing, morphing, and there's more than one. Apparently there's Nibiru coming in, but that might not be there's a lot of speculation. But if they were to only understand the patents and the things that were in existence, thus shall be fun. Had to put that in there because there is a solar simulator patent, and there's a few countries who have those patents. Fun. The sun is abscondito, being thus the storehouse of our little cosmos, self-generating its vital fluid and ever receiving as much as it gives out. The visible sun, only a window cut into this real solar palace and presence, which reflects, however, faithfully in the interior world. So I really like their explanation of what could be possibly the black sun. Thus, there is a regular circulation of the vital fluid throughout our system, of which the sun is the heart. The same as the circulation of the blood in the human body during the Manvarotic solar period or life, the sun contracting arrhythmically at every return of it as the human heart does, only instead of performing the round in a second or so, it takes the solar blood 10 of years and a whole year to pass through the aureolus, sorry guys, and ventricle I have to breathe. Every time this book italicizes, like I physically can't see with my eyes. Ventricles, before it washes the lungs and passes thence to the great veins and arteries of the system. This science will not deny, since astronomy knows of the fixed cycle of 11 years when the number of solar spots increases, which is due to the contraction of the solar heart. The universe, our world, in this case, breathes just as man and every living creature, planet, and even mineral does upon the earth. And as our globe itself breathes every 24 hours, the dark region is not due to the absorption exerted by the vaporous issuing from the bosom of the sun and interposed between the observer and the photosphere, as Father Secchi would have it, nor are the spots formed by the matter, heat, gaseous matter, which the eruption projects upon the solar disk. It is similar to the regular and healthy pulsation of the heart as the life fluid passes through its hollow muscles. Could the human heart be made luminous and the living and throbbing organ being made visible as to have it reflected upon a screen, such as used by the astronomers in their lectures. Says for the moon, then everyone would see the sunspot phenomenon repeated every second due to its contraction and the rushing of the blood. It is said in a work of geology that it is the dream of science that all the recognized chemical elements will one day be found but modifications of a single material element. Occult philosophy has taught this since the existence of human speech and languages, adding only on the principle of immutable law of analogy, as it is above, so it is below. That other axiom, that there is neither spirit nor matter in reality, but only numberless aspects of the one ever hidden, is the homogeneous primordial element is simple and single only on the terrestrial plane of consciousness and sensation, since matter, after all, is nothing else than the sequence of our own states of consciousness, and spirit an idea of psychic intuition. Even on the next higher plane, the single element which is defined on our earth by current science as the ultimate undecomposable constituent of such kind of matter would be pronounced in the world of a higher spiritual perception as something very complex indeed. Our purest water would be found to yield, instead of its two declared simple elements of oxygen and hydrogen, many other constituents undreamt of by our terrestrial modern chemistry. As in the realm of matter, so in the realm of spirit, the shadow of that which is cognized on the plane of objectivity exists on that of pure subjectivity. The speck of the perfectly homogeneous substance, the sarcode of the Heclean Monera, is now viewed as the archbiosis of terrestrial existence. Oh no. And some long name that I am not pronouncing has to be traced to its pre-terrestrial archbiosis. This is the first perceived by the astronomers at its third stage of evolution and in the secondary creation, so-called. But the students of esoteric philosophy understand too well the secret meaning of stanza. Brahma has essentially the aspect of Prakti, both evolved and unevolved spirit. O twice born, initiate is the leading aspect of Brahma. The next is the twofold aspect of Prakti and Purusha, both evolved and unevolved, and time is the last. Anu is one of the names of Brahma, as distinct from Brahma, neuter, and it means atom. The most atomic of the atomic, the immutable and imperishable. Pause. So, hi, Anu, Anunnaki. Just say. Surely, then, the elements now known to us by their number, whatever it may, as they are understood and defined at present, are not, nor can they be, the primordial elements. Those were formed from the curds of the cold radiant mother and the fire seed of the hot father, who are one. Or to express it in the plainer language of modern science, those elements have their genius in the depths of the primordial fire mist, the masses of incandescent vapor of the irresolvable nuclei. For Professor Newcomb shows in popular astronomy, resolvable nebulae are not a class of proper nebulae. More than half of those which at first mistaken for nebula, he thinks are what he calls starry clusters. The elements now known have arrived at their state of permanency in this fourth round and fifth race. They have a short period of rest before they are propelled once more on their upward spiritual evolution, when the living fire of Orcus will dissolute the most irresolvable and scatter them into the primordial once again. Meanwhile, the occultist goes further, as been shown in the commentaries on the 7 stanzas. Hence, he could hardly hope for any help or recognition from science, which will reject both his absolutely spiritual Adam and his menace Prutas, mind-born men. By resolving the single material element into one absolute irresolvable element, spirit, or root matter, thus placing it at once outside the reach of providence and physical philosophy, he has, of course, but little in common with the orthodox men of science. He maintains that spirit and matter are 2 facets of the unknowable unity. They are apparently contrasted aspects depending A, on the various degrees of differentiation of the latter, and B, on the grades of consciousness obtained by man himself. This is, however, metaphysics, and has little to do with physics. However great in its own terrestrial limitations the physical philosophy may now be. Nevertheless, once the science admits, if not the actual existence, at any rate, the possibility of existence of a universe with its numberless forms, conditions, and aspects built out of the single substance, it has to go further unless it also admits the possibility of one element or one life of the occultist. It will have to hang up this single substance, especially if limited to only the solar nebulae, like the coffin of Mamet in midair, though minus the attractive magnet that sustains that coffin. Fortunately for the speculative physicists, if unable to state with any degree of precision what the nebular theory does imply, we have, thanks to Professor Winchell and several disagreeing astronomers, been able to learn what it does not imply. Unfortunately, this is far from clearing even the most simple of the problems that have vexed and still do vex the men of learning in their research after truth. We have to proceed with our inquiries, starting with the earliest hypothesis of modern science, if we would discover where and why it sins. Perchance it may be found that Stallo is right after all, that the blunders, contradictions, and fallacies made by the most eminent men of learning are simply due to their abnormal attitude. They are and want to remain materialistic, quad meme, and yet the general principles of the automo-mechanical theory, the basis of modern physics, are substantially identical with cardinal doctrines of ontological metaphysics. Thus, the fundamental errors of ontology become apparent in proportion to the advance of physical science, concepts of modern physics. Science is honeycombed with metaphysical conceptions, but the scientists will not admit the charge and fight desperately to put auto-mechanical mess to purely incorporeal and spiritual laws in nature on our plane, refusing to admit their substantially, even on other planes, the bare existence of which they reject a priori. So herein lies something that, again, I keep saying, that we live in a holographic, ontological, mathematical, simulated matrix. It's kind of telling us similar words in Crazy Land. It is easy to show, however, how scientists wedded to their materialistic views have endeavored ever since the day of Newton to put false masks on fact and truth. But their task is becoming with every year more difficult, and with every year also chemistry, above all the other sciences, approaches nearer and nearer the realm of the occult in nature. It is assimilating the very truths taught by the occult sciences for ages, but hereto bitterly derided. Matter is eternal, says the esoteric doctrine, but the matter the occultists conceive of in its alaya, or zero state, is not the matter of modern science, not even its most rarefied gaseous state. Mr. Crooks, radiant matter would appear matter of the grossest kind in the realm of the beginnings, as it becomes pure spirit before it has returned back even to its first point of differentiation. Therefore, when the adept or alchemist adds that through matter is eternal, for it is prahada, yet atoms are born of every new manvarata, or reconstruction of the universe. It is not such contradiction as a materialist who believes in nothing beyond the atom might think. There is difference between manifested and unmanifested matter, between pradhana, the beginningless, and the endless cause, and prakti, or the manifested effect, says Sloka. That which is the unevolved cause is emphatically called by the most eminent sages pradhana, original base, which is subtle prakti. That which is eternal and which at once and is not a mere process. That which is modern phraseology is respectively referred to as spirit and matter, is one eternally as the perpetual cause, and it is neither spirit nor matter, but it rendered in Sanskrit had that all that is, was, or will be, all that is imagination of man is capable of conceiving. Even the esoteric pantheism of Hinduism renders it as non-monotheistic philosophy ever did, for the superb phraseology, its cosmogony, begins with the well-known words, there was neither day nor night, neither heaven nor earth, neither darkness nor light, and there was not aught else appeasable by the senses or by mental faculties. There was the one Brahma, essentially Prakti, nature and spirit, for the two aspects of Vishnu, which are other than his supreme essential aspect, the Prakti and the spirit, and Brahman. When these two other aspects of his no longer subsist, but are dissolved, then that aspect whence from and the rest, creation, proceed anew, a denominated time, O twice born. It is that which is dissolved, or the illusory dual aspect of that, the essence of which is eternally one, that we call eternal matter or substance. Formless, sexless, inconceivable, even to our sixth sense or mind, in which, therefore, we refuse to see that which monotheists call personal, anthropomorphic God. How are these two propositions, the matter is eternal and the atom periodical and not eternal, viewed by modern exact science? The materialist physicists will criticize and laugh them to scorn. The liberal and progressive man of science, however, the true and earnest scientific researcher after truth, the eminent chemist Dr. Crooks, will collaborate the probability of the two statements, for hardly has the echo of his lecture on genius of the elements died away, the lecture which delivered by him before the chemical section of the British Association at the last Birmingham meeting, so started every evolutionist who heard or read it. Then there came another one in March last 1888. Once more, the president of the Chemical Society brings before the world science and the public the fruits of some new discoveries in the realm of atoms, and these discoveries justify the occult teachings in every way. They are more startling even than the statements made by him in the first lecture, quoted later, and deserved with well the attention of every occultist. The sophist and metaphysician, this is what he says in his elements and meta elements, thus justifying Stallo's charges and provisions with the fearlessness of a scientific mind which loves science for truth's sake, regardless of any consequence to his own glory and reputation. He, quote, his own words. Permit me, gentlemen, now to draw your attention for a short time to a subject which concerns the fundamental principles of chemistry, a subject which may lead us to admit the possible existence of bodies which, though neither compounds nor mixtures, are not elements in the strictest sense of the word, bodies which I venture to call meta-elements. To explain my meaning, it is necessary for me to revert to our conception of an element. What is the criterion of an element? Where are we to draw the line between distinct existence and identity? No doubt the oxygen, sodium, chlorine, sulfur are separate elements, and when we come to such groups as chlorine, bromine, iodine, and etc., we still feel no doubt, although were degrees of elementicity admissible, and to that we are ultimately have to come, it might be allowed that chlorine approximates much more closely to bromine than to oxygen, sodium, or sulfur. Again, nickel and cobalt are neither near to each other, very near, though no one questions their claim to rank as distinct elements. So I cannot help asking what would have been the prevalent opinion among chemists have the respective solutions of these bodies and their compounds present identical colors instead of colors which, approximately speaking, are mutually complementary. Would their distinct nature have even now been recognized? When we pass further and come to the so-called rare earths, the ground is less secure under our feet. Perhaps we may admit scandium, yttrium, and others of the like sort to elemental rank. But what are we to say in the case of phrazio and neodymium, between which there may be said to exist no well-marked chemical difference, their chief claim to separate individuality being slight differences in basicity and crystallizing powers, though their physical distinctions, as shown by spectrum observations, are very strongly marked. Even here, we may imagine the disposition of the majority of chemists would incline toward the side of latency, so that they would admit these two bodies within the charmed circle, whether in so doing they would be able to appeal to any broad principle in an open question. If we admit these candidates, how unjust are we to exclude the series of elemental bodies or meta-elements made known to us by Krauss and Nelson? Here the spectral differences are very well marked, and while my own research on didatum show also a slight difference in basicity between some, at least, of those doubtful bodies, in the same category must it be included the numerous separated bodies into which it is probable that turium, erbium, samarium, and other elements commonly so called have been and are being split up. Where, then, are we to draw the line? The different groupings shade off so imperceivably the one into the other that it is impossible to erect a definite boundary between any two adjacent bodies, and to say that the body on the side of the line is an element while the one on the other side is non-elementary or a mere something which stimulates or approximates to an element. Wherever an apparently reasonable line might be drawn, it would no doubt be easy at once to assign most bodies to their proper side. As in all cases of classification, the real difficulty comes in when the borderline is approached. Slight chemical differences, of course, are admitted, and up to a certain point, so are well-marked physical differences. What are we to say, however, when only chemical difference is an almost imperceivable tendency for the one body of a couple or a group to precipitate before the other. Again, there are cases where the chemical differences reach the vanishing point, although well-marked physical differences still remain. Here we stumble on a new difficulty in such obscurities. What is chemical and what is physical? We are not entitled to call a slight tendency of a nascent amphoreous precipitate to fall down in advance of another, a physical difference. And we may not call colored reactions, and depending on the amount of some particular acid present and varying according to the concentration of the solution and to the solvent employed, chemical differences. I do not see how we can deny elementary character to a body which differs from another by well-marked color or spectrum reactions, while we accord it to another body whose only claim is a very minute difference in basic powers. Having once opened the door wide enough to admit some spectrum differences, we have to inquire how minute a difference qualifies the candidates to pass. I will give an instance from my own experience of some of the doubtful candidates. And here, the great chemist gives several cases of very extraordinary behavior of molecules and earths, apparently the same, in which yet they, when examined very closely, were found to exhibit differences which, however imperceivable, still showed that none of them are simple bodies, and that the 60 or 70 elements accepted in chemistry can no longer cover the ground. Their name apparently is legion. But as the so-called periodic theory stands in the way of an unlimited multiplication of elements, Mr. Crookes is obliged to find some means of the reconciling of the new discovery with the old theory. The theory, he says, he received such abundant verification that cannot lightly accept any interpretation of phenomenon which fails to be in accordance with it. But if we suppose the elements reinforced by vast number of bodies slightly differing from each other in the properties and forming, if I may use the expression, aggregations of nebulae, where we formerly saw or believe we saw separate stars, the periodic arrangement can no longer be definitely grasped. No longer, that is, if we retain our usual conception of an element. Let us then modify this conception for element read elementary group, such elementary groups taking the place of the old elements in the periodic scheme, and the difficulty falls away. And defining an element, let us take not an external boundary, but an internal type. Let us say the smallest ponderable quantity of yttrium is an assemblage of ultimate atoms and almost infinitely more like each other than they are to the atoms of any other approximating element. It does not necessarily follow that the atoms shall be absolutely among themselves. The atomic weight which we ascribe to yttrium, therefore, merely represents a mean value around the actual weight of the individual atoms of the element, ranging within certain limits. But it is, my conjecture is tenable. Could we separate atom from atom? Should we find them varying within narrow limits on each other side of the mean? The very process of fractionation implies the existence of such differences in certain bodies. Thus, the fact and truth have more force than the hand of exact science, and compelled it to enlarge its views and change its terms, which, masking the multitude, reduce them to one body, like the sepentary Elohim and their hosts, transformed by the materialistic religionists into one Jehovah, replace the chemical terms molecule, atom, particle by the words hosts, monads, devas. And one might think to the genesis of God, the primeval evolution of Monveritic intelligent forces was being described, but the learned lecturer adds something still more suggestive to his descriptive remarks, whether consciously or unconsciously, who knoweth? For he says the following: Until lately, such bodies pass muster as elements. They had defined indefinite properties, chemical and physical. They had recognized atomic weights. If we take a pure dilute solution of such a body, yttrium, for instance, and if we add to it an excess of strong ammonia, we obtain a precipitate which appears perfectly homogeneous. But if instead we add very dilute ammonia in quantity sufficient only to precipitate 1/2 of the base present, we obtain no immediate precipitate. If we stir up the whole thoroughly so as to ensure a uniform mixture of the solution and the ammonia and set the vessel aside for an hour, carefully excluding dust, we may still find the liquid clear and bright without any vestige of turbidity. After 3 or 4 hours, however, an opalescence will declare itself, and the next morning the precipitate will have appeared. Now let us ask ourselves, what can be the meaning of this phenomenon? The quantity of precipitant added was insufficient to throw down more than half the yttra present. Therefore, a process akin to selection has been going on for several hours. The precipitation has evidently not been effect at random. Those molecules of the base being decomposed, which happen to come into contact with a corresponding molecule of ammonia, for we have taken care that the liquid should be uniformly mixed, so that one molecule of the original salt would not be more exposed to the decomposition than any other. If further we consider the time which elapses before the appearance of the precipitate, we cannot avoid coming to the conclusion that the action which has been going on for the first few hours is a selective character. The problem is not why a precipitate is produced, but that determines or directs some atoms to fall down and others to remain in solution. Out of the multitude of atoms present, what power is it that directs each atom to choose the proper path? We may picture to ourselves some direct force passing the atoms once by one in review, selecting one for participation and the other for solution, till all have their adjusted. The italics in the above passage are ours. Well, may a man of science ask himself, what power is it that directs each atom? And what is it that its character should be selective? Theists would solve the question by answering God, and would solve nothing philosophically. Occultism answers on its own pantheistic grounds and refers the reader to a subsequent section, God, Monads, and Atoms. The learned lecturer sees it that which it has chief concern, the finger posts and the traces of a path which may lead to the discovery and the full and complete demonstration of a homogeneous element in nature. He remarks, quote, in order that such a selection can be effective, there evidently must have some slight differences between which it is possible to select, and this difference almost certainly must be one of basicity, so selected as to be imperceivable by any tests of present known, by susceptible of being nursed and encouraged to a point when the difference can be appreciated by ordinary tests. Occultism, which knows of the existence and presence in nature of the one eternal element, at the first differentiation of which the roots of the tree of life are periodically struck, needs no scientific proofs. It says ancient wisdom has solved the problem ages ago. I, earnest as well as mocking reader, science is slowly but as surely approaching our domains of occult. It is forced by its own discoveries to adopt nolens, volens, our phraseology and symbols. Chemical science is now compelled by the very force of things to accept even our illustration of the evolution of gods and atoms, so suggestively and undeniably figured in the caduceus of Mercury, the god of wisdom, and the allegorical language of the archaic sages, says a commentary in the esoteric doctrine. Everyone knows that the caduceus is already modified by the Greeks. The original symbol with the triple head of the serpent became altered into a rod with a knob, and the two lower heads were separated, thus disfiguring somewhat the original meaning. Yet it is good as an illustration as can be for our purpose. The lyre rod entwined by two serpents, verily, the wonderful powers of the magic caduceus were sung by all the ancient poets with a very good reason for those who understood the secret meaning. Interesting. See how altered even the symbols that we think are like the caduceus were altered again and again. Now it says the learned president of the Chemical Society of Great Britain in the same lecture, which has any reference to or bearing upon our above mentioned doctrine. Very little, only this and nothing more. Quote, in the Birmingham address already referred to, I asked my audience to picture the action of two forces on the original prototype. One being time, accompanied by a lowering of temperature, the other swinging to and fro like a mighty pendulum, having periodic cycles of ebb and swell. Rest and activity being intimately connected with the imponderable matter essence or source of energy we call electricity. Now, a simile like this effect, its object, if it fixes in the mind the particular fact it is intended to emphasize, but it must not be expected necessarily to run parallel with all the facts. Besides the lowering of temperature with the periodic ebb and flow of electricity, positive or negative, requisite to confer on the newly born elements their particular atomicity, it is evident that a third factor must be taken into account. Nature does not act on the flat plane. She demands space for her cosmogonic operations, and if we introduce space as a third factor, all appears clear. Instead of a pendulum, which, though to a certain extent a good illustration, is impossible as a fact, let us seek a more satisfactory way of representing what I conceive may have taken place. Let us suppose the zigzag diagram not drawn upon a plane, but a projected in space of 3 dimensions. What figure can we best select to meet all the conditions involved? Many of the facts can be well explained by supposing the projection in space of Professor Emerson Reynolds' zigzag curve to be a spiral. The figure is, however, inadmissible inasmuch as the curve has to pass through a point neutral as the electricity and chemical energy twist in each cycle. We must therefore adopt some other figure, a figure 8, or lemniscate, will foreshorten into a zigzag just as well as a spiral and fulfills every condition of the problem, end quote. The lemniscate for the evolution downward for spirit into matter, another form of a spiral, perhaps it is re-involutionary path onward from matter into spirit, and the necessary gradual and final reabsorption into the Laya state, that which science calls in her own way the point neutral as the electricity, or the 0 point. Such are the occult facts and statement, they may be left with the great security and confidence of science to be justified one day. Let us hear some more about this primordial genetic type of the symbolical caduceus. Such a figure as will result from the very simple simultaneous motions. First, a simple oscillation backwards and forwards, supposed east and west. Secondly, a similar oscillation at right angles to the former, supposed north and south, of half the periodic time, twice as fast. And thirdly, a motion at right angles to these two, supposed downwards, which in its simplest form would be with very unvarying velocity. If we project this figure in space, we find an examination that points of the curves where chlorine, bromine, and iodine are formed come close under each other. So also with sulfur, selenium, and tellurium. Again, phosphorus, arsenic, and antimony. and in like manner an other series of analogous bodies. It may be asked whether this scheme explains how and why the elements appear in this order. Let us imagine a cyclical translation in space, each evolution witnessing the genesis of a group of elements, which I previously represented as a produce during one complete vibration of the pendulum. Let us suppose that one cycle has thus been completed, and the center of the unknown creative force in its mighty journey through space, having scattered along its tracks the primitive atoms, the seeds, if I may use the expression, which presently are to correlate and develop into groupings now known as lithium, beryllium, boron, carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, fluorine, sodium, magnesium, aluminum, silicon, phosphorus, sulfur, and chlorine. What is most probably the form of track now pursued, where it's strictly confined to the same plane of temperature and time. The next elementary groupings to appear would again have been those of lithium, and the original cycle would have been eternally repeated, producing again and again the same 14 elements. The conditions, however, are not quite the same. Space and electricity are as at first, but temperature has altered, and thus instead of the atoms of lithium being supplemented with atoms in all respects analogous with themselves, the atomic groupings which come into being when the second cycle commences form not lithium, but in lineal descendant potassium. Suppose, therefore, this generatics traveling to and fro in cycles along a luminescent path, as above suggested, while simultaneously temperature is declining and time is flowing on, variations which I have endeavored to represent by the downward sink, each coil of the Lemsket track across the same vertical line at lower and lower points, projected in space, and the curve shows a central line, neutral as far as electricity is concerned, and neutral in chemical properties, positive electricity on the north, negative on the south. Dormant atomacies are governed by the distance east and west from the neutral central line, monatomic elements being one removed from it, diatomic 2 removes, and so on. In every successive coil, the law holds good, and is, if proved, the postulate of occult science and Hindu philosophy, that at the hour of the Pralaya, the two aspects, the unknown deity, the swan in darkness, Parakti and Purusha, nature or matter in all forms, and spirit no longer subsist, but are absolutely dissolved, we learn the conclusive scientific opinion of the great English chemist, who caps his proofs by saying, "We have now traced the formation of the chemical elements from knots and voids in a primitive formless fluid. We have shown the possibility, nigh the probability, that the atoms are not eternal in existence, but share with all other created beings and the attributes of decay and death." Occultism says amen to this as a scientific possibility and probability, or for its facts demonstrated beyond the necessary of further proof or any extraneous physical evidence. Nevertheless, it repeats with such an assurance as ever, matter is eternal before becoming atomic, its aspect only periodically. This is sure as the other propositions, which is almost unanimously accepted by astronomers and physicists, namely that the wear and tear of the body of the universe is steadily going on, and that it will finally lead to the extinction of the solar fires, and the destruction of the universe is quite erroneous on the lines traced by men of science. There will be, as there ever would, in time and eternity, periodical dissolutions of the manifested universe, but partial Pralaya after every day of Brahma, and a universal Pralaya, the Mahapralaya, only after the lapse of every Brahmic age. But the scientific cause for such dissolution as brought forward by exact science have nothing to do with the true causes. However, that may be, occultism is one more justified by science, for Mr. Crook said, "We have shown from argument drawn from the chemical laboratory that in matter, which has responded in every test of an element, there are minute shades of difference which may emit a selection. We have seen that the time-honored distinction between elements and compounds no longer keeps pace with the developments of chemical science, but must be modified to include a vast array of intermediate bodies, meta-elements. We have shown how the objections of Clerk Maxwell, weighty as they are, may be met. And finally, we adduced reasons for believing that primitive matter was formed by the act of generative force, throwing off all intervals of times, atoms, endowed with varying quantities of primitive forms of energy. If we may hazard any conjectures as to the source of energy embodied in a chemical atom, we may, I think, premise that the heat radiations propagate outwards through the ether from the ponderable matter of the universe by some process of nature not yet known to us, are transformed at the confines of the universe into the primary, the essential motions of chemical atoms, which the instant into the primary, the essential motions of chemical atoms, which the instants they form, gravitate inwards and thus restore to the universe the energy which otherwise would be lost to it through radiant heat. If the conjecture would be founded, Sir William Thomson, startling prediction of the final decrepitude of the universe through the dispensation of its energy falls into the ground. In this fashion, the gentleman, it seems to me that the question of elements may be provisionally treated. Our slender knowledge of this first mysteries is provisionally extending steadily, surely, and thoroughly, slowly. By a strong and curious confidence and coincidence, even our sempiternary doctrine seems to force the hand of science. If we understand rightly, chemistry speaks of 14 groupings of primitive atoms: lithium, beryllium, boron, carbon. Hang on, I read this already. No, I didn't. Silicon, phosphorus, sulfur, and chlorine. And Mr. Cook, speaking of the dormant, and it enumerates 7 groups of this. Therefore, he says, as the mighty focus of creative energy goes around, we see its successive cycles slowing. In one track of space, seeds of lithium, potassium, rubidium, and caesium. In another track, chlorine, bromine, iodine. Sorry, guys. In the third, sodium, copper, silver, and gold. In the fourth, sulfur, selenium, and tellurium. In the fifth, beryllium, calcium, strontium, and barium. In the sixth, magnesium, zinc, cadmium, and mercury. In the seventh, phosphorus, arsenic, antimony, and bismuth, which makes 7 groupings on one hand. And after showing in another track the other elements, namely aluminum, gallium, indium, and thallium, silicon, germanium, and tin, carbon, titanium, and zirconium. He adds, while a natural position near the neutral axis is found for the 3 groups of elements regulated by Professor Mendeleev to a sort of hospital for incurables, his 8th family. It might be interesting to compare these 7 of the 8 family of incurables with the allegories concerning the 7 primitive sons of Mother Infinite Space, or Aditi, the 8th son rejected by her. Many strange coincidences may thus be found between those intermediate links, named meta-elements or elementoids, and those whom occult science names their nominae, the intelligent minds and rulers of those groupings of monads and atoms. But this would lead us too far. Let us be content with finding the confession of the fact that this deviation from absolute homogeny should mark the constitution of these molecules or aggregations of matter, which we designate elements, and will perhaps be clearer if we return in imagination to the earliest dawn of our material universe, and face to face with the great secret, try to consider the process of elemental evolution, thus finally science in the person of the highest representatives, in order to make itself clearer to the profane, adopts the phraseology of such old adepts as Roger Bacon, and returns to the prototype. All this is hopeful and suggestive of the signs of the time. And these signs are many and multiply daily, but none are more important than those just quoted. For now, the chasm between the occult, superstitious, and unscientific teachings and exact science is completely bridged, and one, at least of the few eminent chemists of the day, is in the realm of the infinite possibilities of occultism. Every new step he will take will bring him nearer and nearer to the mysterious center from which radiates the innumerable paths that lead down spirit into matter, which transform the gods and the living monads into man and sentient nature. But we have something more to say on this subject in the following section, which we'll read next time, which is the coming force. Coming force. I do apologize for a lot of non-pronouncing words properly and my dyslexia flipping so many things on me. As the energies are very high and potent right now, as that usually lets my brain up on fire and explodes it. I'm not lying. I noticed, I had an observation, if we're going to keep the scientific terminology, that every time there's like X class, well, not really X class, M classes, and any kind of flare that hits us, my brain gets wonky. And everything starts flipping and turning on me, not more than normal. I could say that. So I hope you guys enjoyed this section. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my channel. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you to everybody. I'm going to probably get Good and Evil done. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to get a video in tomorrow. We'll see. I got a lot of the art stuff happening, and I actually took a break from candle making to pop on and do a reading for you today. So I hope all of you have a wonderful rest of your weekend. Sending love, light, protection, shielding, compassion, and grace. Please be safe, be seen, and I hope to see you all in the next one. Bye, guys.